At the end of the day, it's not about what you have or even what you've accomplished. It's about what you've done with those accomplishments. It's about who you've lifted up, who you've made better. It's about what you've given back. Denzel Washington. Welcome to Inspire Vision. Our sole purpose is to elevate the lives of others and to inspire you to do the same.
Fletcher, welcome to the show.
Hey, great to be on here with you. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, I'm really excited. So where are you located?
I am in a picturesque postcard of a town in Washington State called Chelan. We live on a 50-mile glacier-fed lake and a population of 5,000 year-round. And then most of Seattle and Bellevue comes over and plays in our town for the summer months. So we swell up to about 75,000 people. So
I get that. I live in a place when I'm in the U.S. in Eden, which is up in the mountain, Utah, and same thing, except it's skiers that come in the wintertime. Yeah, but anyway, I'm in Thailand now, so it's what, 5 o'clock p.m. your time?
Yes, it is. Yes.
And it's 8 o'clock a.m. my time the next day.
Oh, right on. Right on. You're in the future.
Yeah, so that'll be fun. Yeah, hey, that's a great thought. Anyway, can you share with the audience kind of who you are? And I love the story of a journey of what brought you, what's your background and what brought you to this point in time in your life of what you're doing now.
All right. Well, I wear a lot of different hats. I play a lot of different roles. I'm a father, I'm a friend, I'm a coach, I'm an author, these types of things. But I love your question, who are you? Because who I am is a clearing for other people to feel heard, safe, and empowered. And that actually is really important to me because that influences the decisions that I make during my day, during my weeks, my months. That's who I am. I'm a safe place for people to feel safe, heard, and empowered. And what put me on this trajectory was really some very kind people in my life. And it started when I was in third or fourth grade. We had an inspirational speaker come to our gymnasium. And I don't remember what all he was talking about, but I do remember this. He gave every single one of us a reflective sticker. And I put that sticker on my bed frame. And so I saw it every day all the way through 12th grade. And on that sticker, it said, start your day with PMA, positive mental attitude. And then the second thing it said on there was expect something wonderful to happen. And that message somehow put me on a course for personal development. When I was in fourth and fifth grade, I was reading Norman Vincent Peale's The Power of Positive Thinking. So I was a bit of an odd duck. My dad came out on the stoop one day and he said, "Hey, Fletch, what you reading?" I said, "The Power of Positive Thinking." He said, he just stopped. He's like, "By Norman Vincent Peale?" I was like, "Yeah." And he said that same thing. "You are a bit of an odd duck, Fletcher." But ever since then, I've always had this draw toward it. And I was going to go into the ministry at one point, and I've been a professional magician for 35 years, and I've always kind of used that as a way of connecting with people as well. And then it was 2015 or 2014 when I finally made the decision to go full time into what I'm doing now, which is helping people change the way they think in order to produce outstanding outcomes in their health, wealth, and relationships.
Well, and I love that. And you said something that just really struck me strong because it's something that is so much of a belief in myself. And that is that your behavior is merely a response to who you are. And I think for people to understand that is so important that, their behavior doesn't create who they are, but who they are creates their behavior. And therefore that
Yes.
focus is on who they are. And, you talk about transformation, you're a magician, and it just hit me. Every once in a while, I'm looking on TikTok, which I will admit I do. And, we're with America Has Talent,
Yeah.
and it started to come up with all of these magicians that are transforming themselves on stage from, in this case, here's this beautiful woman, and the next thing you know, she kneels down and she becomes an eagle. And it's like, how on earth are they transforming? And obviously, that is a fake transformation, though I have no clue on how they do that. But, and you probably do as a magician, but the point is as we talk about transformation, as you talk about it, it's really transforming ourselves so that then our behavior, our outcomes are different.
You nailed it. Yeah. And you know what? I love magic. It really provides a moment of awe. And as adults, we used to get awe all the time when we were children. I mean,
Yeah.
we were in constant awe and wonder and delight. And it's less frequent as adults. So that's why I love performing magic for adults, because we get to witness something that defies logic, defies physics. It boggles the mind. And there's that brief window of time where we cannot figure it out. And all that we're left with is the following sentence: how did you do that? And it's so very infrequent that we feel like we don't know how something's done as an adult. One more cool thing about magic, there's the term abracadabra.
Uh,
And I used to, for many years, even while I was performing, I thought that was just a made up word. But it actually is in the Aramaic language. There's a word called abracadabra, and it means, excuse me, it means I will create as I speak. And I just find that fascinating because at the end of the day, transformation really we create transformation, we create our lives through language. And I just thought that was fantastic.
oh yeah, yeah. And you know what? One of the things you mentioned is those rare moments of curiosity. How did that
Yeah.
happen? What have you found? What is curiosity in an individual? How does that play into their becoming someone different?
Oh gosh, you're going deep. I love this concept of getting curious because our default is to judge,
Yes.
right? So we judge, and so I recently just did a show all about this. Is when if we want to break the pattern of judgment, because it becomes habitual. We're taught it, and it's not good, bad, right, or wrong. We're just taught it, and that at the end of the day, it just doesn't serve us very well. So if we want to break the cycle of judgment, we begin a new cycle of getting curious. And so there's lots of ways to get curious, but they come in the form of questions like, what did they mean by that? Or I wonder how that is for that person. Or I wonder what happened to them that they would say or do or think such a thing. We begin to get curious about how it is how it might be to be in those other person's shoes. And when we do that, we interrupt the default tendency to judge, because judge just creates resistance and creates more separation. But when we get curious, that's the beginning of creating affinity and moving toward one another.
Well, and you're talking about connection, friendships, relationships, whatever they happen to be, and and I think one of the things you've hit on so well, at least that hits me, is this fact that curiosity of what did you mean? I mean, so many times, and I've talked to a few people, and I love this about perception and how our perception is so motivated by our inner thoughts and subconscious thoughts and so forth. But when we get into communication and we're trying to develop better relationships and better connections, so often we allow our perceptions to tell us what they meant in that communication.
Yes.
Whereas as you're talking, being able to go being able to go back and say, what did you mean by that? All of a sudden starts to clarify and really change that communication, which can eliminate a lot of disruption in that relationship.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. So if you want to build more affinity in your relationships, practice curiosity.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. So, we talk about, well, I love how you talked about the fact that even as a young child, you had these words up on your bedpost. And every day you're looking at those. And I would assume that because of that, you develop some neural pathways and you experience things coming into your life on a regular basis that you would not have experienced if you had not had that. Could you share with the audience a little bit about neural pathways and how they create habits in our lives, whether good or bad? And if they're bad, how we can literally, and can we as adults, change those neural pathways and develop habits that become just natural and create a good experience for us in our lives?
Yes, I love this topic. Thanks for asking these questions. So number one, yeah, I talk about that our mind has different programs. We're familiar with the buzzword mindset, right?
Yes. Oh, yeah,
But
absolutely.
if we reverse that word, go from mindset to set mind, we begin to understand, oh, my mind is set. What is it set about? Well, um, it's set about my ideas about my health, my wealth, relationships. It's set about these ideas. What does it mean to be set? Well, think of our iPhone. Our iPhone has all these applications on it, right? We can
Right.
download an app, and those applications then do a very specific task. They're designed for a very specific task, and we use those when we want a specific outcome. Our brain is the same way. We've developed applications or programs in the mind. We don't just have one mindset. We have many mindsets. We've got a particular mindset around sex, around money, around friendships, all different applications, if you will. Now, here's the deal. We didn't intentionally set up any of those applications or programs in our mind. They happened without our permission, consent, or approval, and they happened at a very early age, right? The neural pathways they created literally programs in the mind. Now, here's the thing. Our iPhones, we upgrade that device. Every few years, we get an actual new phone. And then even when we have an iPhone or an Android phone or whatever it is, every month or so, we get a message that says, hey, we need to upgrade the hardware. So you put it on your charger and it upgrades while you're sleeping. But here's the deal. When's the last time that any of us said, hey, you know what? I think I'm going to upgrade my programming in my mind. I'm going to I'm going to intentionally upgrade so that I begin to think more efficiently, think more clearly, think differently. Now that doesn't happen very often. But the iPhone, all the programs on our iPhone and all of our technology, they're based on the same principles of the mind, neural networks, right? And so what we know now better than we've ever known in the past is that our brains are plastic, right? That we have this thing called neuroplasticity. And we used to think that we're after a certain age, we were done. Put a fork in it, it's done. But we know that's not the case now. We know that we can actually rearrange the circuitry in the brain to some extent. And in certain cases, to a very large extent. It takes intentionality and it takes what I call practice. That's why my whole entire curriculum and the book that I wrote is called The Practice of Feeling Good. And I actually outline how to transform and rearrange some of that circuitry in my book. The good news is that it's not as challenging as one might think, but it does take intentional practice.
Well, and as you're talking about that, what comes to my mind is so many people talk about, I want to speak my own voice and, I want to really be who I am. And yet, as you talk about the neural pathways that have developed as children, and again, been affected by parents, religion, school, all of those types of
Yes.
things, and our perception of what has been said, whether that's reality or not, that literally we become victims. And I hate to use that word at that aspect, but think about how many people are living their lives as victims because they are at the effect of all of those aspects rather than in control because, as you say, they've managed to reset their mind in a different aspect and start to experience a different experience in their lives.
Exactly. So it's very common for people to get to a place in their life or in a situation where they're like, gosh, how did my life end up like this? Or how did my financial situation end up like this? Or how did this relationship end up like this? And then they rush to the next question, which is, well, how can I change it? Now, the challenge here is that if you don't understand that you're operating out of a very specific program that was set up without your permission, consent, or approval, what's going to happen is you're going to be trying to change the situation, but it's based in the very belief system that got you into this situation. And that program is only going to provide answers that are heavily steeped in justification of the belief. So what we want to begin to ask is this: what have I been believing that got me into this situation, or that has produced this current outcome? What have I been believing? We want to get, again, coming back to getting curious, we want to get curious about what have I been believing about this situation? Then we can make a determination. Does that belief serve me, or has it been holding me back? Has it been making me act as a victim or a victor, right? Then we can ask the next very important question, and that is this: what could I be believing about this situation that would produce a different outcome? This all of a sudden takes us into the observer mode of what I call the machinery, right? So the brain and the program's running. Now we're getting curious at a level, what could I believe about this situation that might produce a different outcome? Now I'm getting closer to actually getting in the driver's seat of my life.
Well, yeah, yeah, and I love that. And as you talk about it, I think about what one thing is went back to business school, and it was really more about behavioral type of stuff. One of the things that is talked about is the fact that you need to step outside of yourself, and I love that concept because I think for some people it's really difficult to figure out what you were just talking about. But when you can look at the perception of, all right, I'm going to step outside myself and now observe myself. I actually experienced that about 4 years ago, where in a particular situation, I just kept finding the same thing over and over again. And finally, I went through that process with a coach, and all of a sudden it's like, wow. And it literally changed my mind. And it was difficult. It was really
Yes.
difficult to change that belief system. But when I did, new adventures came out and a whole new life has been created.
I love that. And I love what you just shared because that is literally the practice of setting up new neural pathways. When you make a decision, like I'll give you an example from my life. I always thought that life was a struggle, and I always thought that I was not good with money. So guess what I experienced a lot of in my life?
Oh, yeah.
Struggle and scarcity of finances, right? So when I decided, first of all, when I saw that that was my belief, I asked myself, well, what would I like to believe? Now, I'm not saying I'm going to believe that right away, but what would I love to believe? What would feel good to believe about life? And so I wrote these things down. Life is a gift. Life is an adventure. Life is an opportunity, right? Life is a roller coaster experience. And about finances, like I can attract and create wealth. That money is always in circulation, and I can be take part in that circulation. So I began to write down beliefs that I wanted to have, which then activates your reticular activation system, right? Your RAS, which is your filtering system. And that filtering system, as you know, filters out the stuff that's not in alignment with your beliefs and the stuff that is in alignment. And so just like you, I began to have this shift in my mindset, and the outcomes I began producing were in alignment with the new beliefs.
Yeah, and I think that's amazing how that works. So one of the things that as I went on your website, I saw a particular comment, and it struck me as like, all right, we're going to have a conversation about this because in your book, there's something you say about values don't mean jack. And
Yes.
for me, and I'm also a certified behavioral analyst, values are so important. So I'd love for you to talk about that because I think values in some degree control what we do and what we think.
Okay. Yeah, I love this conversation and thanks for bringing it up. So, and first of all, I don't have to be right about any of this, okay? But as a lot of people talk a lot, they talk a lot about values, and big companies will even take, weekend retreats. We're like, hey, we're going to identify our core values, and then we're going to come back and we're going to kick some butt, and things are going to change around here. And what happens is they spend all that money, they come back and they may see a little bit of improvement, but give it 3 or 4 months, and suddenly things are back to normal, back the way they were. And they're like, hey, we just have this retreat on our values? How come people aren't in alignment with them? So, and people say, well, some people, my clients, they're single, and they're like, Fletcher, I really want to find somebody. I want to find my person. I want to find a partner in life, but I want them to share the same values that I share. And I say, well, what you did was you didn't narrow the dating pool. You just opened it up to every single person on the planet, because all of us, in my opinion, share the exact same values. So in my book, I make a list of values. Freedom. We value freedom. We value financial stability. We value connection. We value love. We value family. We value contribution. We value honesty. On and on and on and on and on. And in my book, I say these are our values. And then there's another column right next to it, the exact same values, but the title on top of that column says the mafia's values. And we begin to see that we share the exact same values as the mafia and every organized crime syndicate on the planet. Now, some people want to argue and say, "What? That can't be true." And I ask them, "Do you think the mafia values freedom?" Well, sure. How about financial stability? Well, yeah. How about family? Well, absolutely. How about creativity, collaboration? Okay, but they don't value honesty. Oh, no, no, no. They value honesty at a very high level within their own. See, we share the same set of values. So what I've concluded is our values are indicators of preference. Now, that's not insignificant. They are a guiding light, but they don't move the needle. What moves the needle is our standards around the values. See, we all value honesty, but raise your hand if you ever lie, right? I'm raising my hand, right? I value integrity and being your word, and I've done my fair share of lying, okay? Or omissions of truth, or white lies, however you want to call it. So it's our standards around the values that actually produce our results. A standard in my book is what you're willing to settle for. So I used to have a standard. If you would have asked me, hey, Fletcher, do you value financial stability? Absolutely. But if you would have looked at my checking account, you would have found very little money. And if you looked at my savings account, it would have been a big fat zero. Okay. So did I value financial stability? Yes. Was I experiencing it? No, because what I was willing to settle for was spending more money than I was bringing in each month. Now, when I actually got serious and understood what my standard was, what I had been settling for, see, because most of our standards we don't choose, just like the programs from our childhood, we didn't choose those. And we didn't choose our standards. When I got clear about this standard wasn't serving my life, then I was able to say, oh, no, hold on, what do I want my standard to be? My standard has been that I've been behind on many of my bills. Then what I did was I said, I want my standard to be that I'm always financially ahead. I want to be paid up in advance. So right now, even like right now in my life today, if you went down to the PUD or the city of Chelan and looked at my water, sewer, garbage bills, you'll see that I'm paid up 3 or 4 or 5 months in advance. not behind, which was my old standard. I'm paid in advance. And that's what I'm willing to settle for now. So when we get clear about what our standards are in relationship to our values, it's a game changer.
Well, and I can't think of the word right now, but let me share something. As I was getting certified in behavioral aspects, one of the studies that they shared was two salespeople that had been hired, and they had been interviewed, and this gets into personality and so forth. So they both had similar personalities, where they were both really good with people, but also very powerful and willing to move forward. And yet one person was just killing it, and the other salesman was sucking. All right. And so they finally went in and really did a deep analysis that I was trained to do. And one of the things they came up with, and I'm not sure that values is the right word, but they realized that the individual who was really killing it had that sense and importance of economy in their lives. The other person had that sense of art. He was really much more into art and creativity and so forth. And therefore, he was not successful as a salesperson. So I look at that, and that's not really values, but it's something a little bit deeper than values. What do you talk about that, and what's the word that should be used with that
Yeah,
in your mind?
yeah, that's a really interesting example. And I think in both salespeople, if you would have asked them like, "Hey, do you value success and do you value
Exactly.
financial stability?" They would have both absolutely, right?
Right.
But one had this bent towards more art and artistic tendency in his life, and probably didn't have a hadn't established conscientiously or in what's the word I'm looking for, intentionally, a standard, right? So like when I was in sales, my standard was very clear. I had to have X amount of sales. It wasn't a goal or target. It was a standard. It was what I was willing to settle for. I wouldn't settle for anything below that, right? Whereas somebody else might be like, well, we'll just see what happens. I
Yeah.
hope I make
What
some sales.
what about the ones that are trained to have the same standards, and yet that inner deep sense is the importance again is the artistic creativity part of it.
Yeah. Then they probably are, misaligned in their career, right?
Right.
Uh,
And how do people figure out what if they're doing what you're talking about, and particularly in your book where they're setting the standards and so forth, and yet they're still not experiencing the
yes.
outcome that they're looking for. How do they go in, or what do they do? What is that guy that's the salesman that really is not being successful because of the fact that what's really important to him is the creativity and so forth. And he finally, how does he get to the point where he finally realizes that?
Love this question. Thank you for asking it. I'm a big believer in baby steps. Now, in the sales world, oh boy, salespeople are making these just huge, huge astronomical targets, right? They're like, all right, if they're making 50,000 one year, the next year they're like, oh, I'm going to make 200,000 next year, right? I mean, they're making these huge jumps, which don't set them up for success. I help my clients, with their accomplishments and their targets, but I always tell them like baby steps. I mean, set yourself up for success. If you're trying to go grow 100%, I'm going to say, hey, let's back down. Can we grow 15%? Because then when you get that, then that's going to be evidence. That's going to bolster your confidence. That's going to be evidence for your belief that you can do it. See, most people set their targets so high if they're not practiced at setting targets, they set them so high and then they don't even come close. And what happens? Same thing that happened last year. They get, disillusioned, give up. So what if we begin taking baby steps? And here's the other thing. We have to be able to articulate the standards. So for instance, I've got standards, as you can imagine, all over my life, including this. This is water. Why do I have a standard about how much water I drink? And I can tell you my standard right now. My standard is I had to drink a minimum of 40 ounces a day. That's not very much for many people. But it's the minimum I have to drink. And why do I have a standard that I can articulate about my water intake? Because I wound up in the ER several years ago with kidney stones, and they asked me, "Hey, Fletcher, how much water do you drink a day?" And I was like, "I have no idea." And they said, because by the looks of it, that the tests, the looks of the results from the tests, it looks like you don't drink any water. You're severely dehydrated and you have kidney stones. Okay. So I was like, whoa, I have to really get present to how much water I'm drinking. I better create a standard. So now I have a standard, a minimum of 40 ounces, and then I have tea and coffee and things, and anything above that is a bonus, right? So if you can't articulate your standards in the areas of your life, I encourage you to what? Get curious, right? Get curious. What are my standards around my finances, my spending, my saving? What are my finances around sex? We even have standards around sex, okay? Frequency. What are my standards around how I talk to other people? What are my standards around honesty? We've got standards all over, and they determine the outcomes in our lives.
Well, and yeah, so true. And yet, another question that comes to my mind,
Hmm.
not this year, but last year, I had a lot of interviews with ladies that had written some wonderful books about the fact that they had been stuck in relationships that they just kept going back. They kept being attracted at the same time to guys. They kept getting the experience of either physical or emotional abuse, all of that going on. And as I looked at that, number one, it was curious to me that they all kind of fit into a certain personality profile. But what was really the key was they couldn't get out of those relationships because the fear of change was greater than the fear of the present experience. And I think for all of us in all of these aspects, as we're talking about making changes in our lives, fear plays such an amazing role because so often we want to make that change, but the fear of change of the unknown is greater than the fear of experiencing what we're experiencing. Can you share your thoughts on that a bit?
Yeah, yeah. And I love what you just, it's perfect. You got so much great material here today. I love it. And some people will say exactly what you said. Well, I'm afraid of the unknown. But we know what's really interesting? It's not the unknown that they're afraid of, because the unknown is just that. It's the unknown. You can't even conceive it. What they're actually afraid of is something from their past happening again in their future. That's what they're afraid of. It's not the unknown. So they're afraid of something from the past happening again. Now, but I want people to understand that fear is not a terrible thing. Fear, I write in my book, there's a gift in fear. In fact, fear travels with a gift, and that gift is actually fear's kryptonite. And so, because at the very core of fear is simply a story. That's it. At the very center of every single fear, it is simply a story. We're not afraid of what's happening now. We're afraid of, but what might happen? What if? What if I get rejected? What if they leave me? What if they abuse me? What if? Fear is a future-based story. Now, nothing wrong with that. It's there to protect us, okay? However, it's hyper vigilant. It looks at everything as fearful. So I said there's a gift in fear. And the gift in fear and its fear is kryptonite is the opportunity to be courageous. You see, you can't be courageous without fear being present. Now, some people say, well, sure, you can be brave. No, you can only be brave if fear is present. Otherwise, this is called confidence. Okay. So then we can get curious again. Here we go, getting curious. What's at the very core of courage? And when we look at it, we see that it's also simply a story. It's a future-based story, but it's dramatically different than the fear-based story. I'll give you the example. let's say a fire truck pulls up to a burning complex, and there's people outside the windows, they're trapped, there's flames, there's smoke, there's people yelling. Those firefighters have a healthy amount of fear. And that fear is saying, man, do not go into that burning building. You're not going to return home if you do. There's no possible way to get those people out. That's too dangerous. If they listened only to that story, they wouldn't go in. But what happens is courage also kicks in. And that courage story is very different. It says something totally different. It says, you can do it. You've trained for this. You have a team. You've done it before. These people need you. And so whichever story we focus on, that's gonna put us into that particular aligned action. And so to the people who are afraid of the future, what I say to them is this: pay attention to the story that's happening in your mind, get present, and create a different story. Create a story of courage and focus on that. Now, easier said than done, but that's why it's called the practice of feeling good.
Oh, and I love that. You know, I'm starting to write a book, and I haven't done that for years. But one of the things I'm talking about, so you've just hit it so much on the head as I talk about, you know, number one, awareness of being aware of what's happening, and then secondly, being brave enough to start making that change, but how fear rolls into that and the fact that we need to be courageous. And so you're using words that I am actually using, and I love that. But here's something I want to ask, and I don't know if you've delved into this aspect of it. When we talk about fear, all right, we are creating an energy. It's like a magnet. And you know, you talk about why do people keep attracting the same negativity or positivity, but in this fact, you know, why do they keep attracting the same negativity? Why do people keep attracting the same type of experiences in relationships or work or whatever that happens to be? And I think about it as a magnet. And I think, and I want your opinion on this, is fear creates that energy, which is a magnet. And here we are. And I think about the fact that when you have a magnet and you bring it close, boom, there it comes. And so we are attracting the very experience that we're afraid of experiencing.
Yes, I agree with that. And I would also say this, so that any story that you think, the brain must create a chemical reaction called an emotion that aligns with the story. Okay? So a perfect example is when you go to a movie, for instance, and you sit down with your popcorn and your drink and the lights come up, and let's say that movie, it starts off with this intense car chase and like a real action-packed scene, right? And that goes on for like 2 minutes. I mean, you're not even eating your popcorn yet. You're just like leaning forward. Your breathing is really shallow and your eyes are open, okay? And you're just motionless. And then after that scene ends, what happens? You relax. And then now there's a funny part and you're laughing. And then there's a sad part and you're on the verge of tears. And then you're laughing again, or you're startled. Your brain has to create an emotional reaction. It's in alignment with wherever you're focused on. So the story that you're focused on, the brain's not going to judge it. It just says, "Oh, Fletcher's focused on a sad story. Cue the emotions for sadness, and let's flood his body with that." And as you know, emotions are powerful, right? They're chemicals. So, so what we have to begin to do is become aware again and say, what's the story that I want to believe? What's the story that I want to focus on? And in doing so, we can actually begin to feel good on demand. We can begin to feel romantic on demand. We can begin to feel excited on demand based on the story that we're focused on.
Well, and I love that. And you know, one of the things I'm very much into theology, as I suspect you are, based on what you said originally. And one of the things I've looked at is this concept of virtue and the concept of charity, and how virtue is great, but that charity has to be there also. And I know you use a different word. You talk about kindness. But what is the effect when we are able to develop that sense and become that sense of charity and kindness to others, and to ourselves, and how does that change our experience, and why is it so important to emphasize that?
Oh boy. Again, good question. When we, because like it was like what you were saying before, you attract that which you give off. Okay. So if we give off resistance, if we give off unpleasantness, it's likely that we're going to get that back. And also it doesn't create workability, right? Fear, judgment, mean-spiritedness, it doesn't create workability in our relationships or in our community. Now, I love the concept of yes, of charity, contribution, kindness, and I define kindness as a friendliness, generosity, consideration, and the willingness to render assistance without the need for praise or compensation. Okay.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
So if we can really act from a sense of kindness, whoa, not only does it create greater workability in our relationships and our communities, but it allows people to lower their own defenses, to lower their armor, so to speak. And it allows for people to begin to trust because what they see is a sense of vulnerability. They see this authenticity. When people see vulnerability, they trust that, right? I mean, that's one of the greatest things about being vulnerable is it allows people to trust you because you've put down your defenses. In fact, the word vulnerability means that you are open to injury. That's what it means.
Yeah.
You're open to injury. When you're at war, what's the other what are the other people you're fighting against looking for? They're looking for where you're vulnerable because that's where they want to attack because that's where you're open to injury. But in a relationship, when we risk being vulnerable, another person sees that as I can trust you. You're safe. And that's also what plays into this kindness, because kindness is not just being polite, right? It's that friendliness, generosity, and consideration for somebody else.
Well, and in my mind, I just think about what that does for the other person, particularly for those that are just struggling in their lives and fearful and don't trust. And all of a sudden, here you are, you go up to an individual and you're kind, you're generous, as you say, and you give them something that they've never expected or experienced, and all of a sudden there's that little bit of trust. And what that does to change their life just a little bit. And if they could
Yes.
continue to experience that, I remember a friend of mine a few years ago who literally was drug addicted, homeless, and he came to a group that I was in, a networking group, and we all kind of came around him. And I remember that, I went, and as he was starting to grow up, I went with him. He asked me to, and I went and took some pictures. I love photography, and of him sitting down with some other homeless people in the same area where he had experienced homelessness. And now I look at him on Facebook. He's married, he has children, he's so happy. And I know it was the kindness of that entire group that surrounded him and supported him and gave him the ability to change his life. And I
I
think
love that.
and I think it's so important for people to understand. And that's why, as I do my podcast, Inspire Vision, Making a Difference, why it's so important to realize that we as individuals, with just little things, can make a difference in other people's lives that can
Yes.
then go on and be paid forward for generation to generation.
Oh, yes. Yes, exactly. That ripple effect is so powerful, right? And my friend Greg Bennett calls it the reverberation effect. That it's not just a ripple, but it begins to bounce off of different people in different situations. Like it gets amplified in a huge way. And I love that story, Dr. Doug. And you know what's cool about that is what you gave that person or what that group of people gave that person by being kind was you gave him hope.
Yes.
And hope is powerful.
And that's what it takes. And as we're we could go on forever, but we're getting close. So before we close today, I'd love for you to just kind of share with the audience a message that you would like to leave with them.
Absolutely. I'd love for your listeners to hear be kind because kindness highlights people's strengths instead of reminding them of their weaknesses. It unites people instead of dividing people. It heals and fosters instead of injuring. And it feels good to give it. It feels good to receive it and to be around it. Kindness is possible and it's free to give.
Yeah, I love it. And so remind the audience again, number one, the name of your book, how they can find it, and number two, how can they find you?
You bet. You bet. My book is called The Practice of Feeling Good, How to Upgrade Your Thinking and Live a Feel Good Life. And you can find it on Amazon.com or go to FletcherEllingson.com. There's a link there as well. And for any of your, if anyone's listening and they want to get a copy of it, email me at Fletcher@FletcherEllingson.com. I'm going to give one free copy to one of your listeners. And just reference Dr. Doug that you heard me with talking with Dr. Doug, and I'll send you a free copy of my book. And with that, be well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Fletcher. This has been
Thank
a
you.
wonderful conversation. And folks,
Absolutely.
I hope this is going to make a difference in your lives. And thanks for listening. We hope that you will join us again soon. So this is Dr. Doug saying namaste.